Hi there, in today's video, we'll be taking a look at the HTML Canvas API, and we're going to see how we can use JavaScript to go ahead and draw images to our HTML Canvas element. So the HTML Canvas API is very powerful, and not only can we draw images, but we can also modify them by doing things like scaling our images and slicing them. And so with these techniques, it allows us to do more complex things like load in the sprite sheet and then create sprite animations on our HTML Canvas API. And it would also allow us to apply advanced techniques like the 9-slice image scaling to go ahead and allow you to scale out your images without distorting them. All right, so to see a demo of what we'll be doing today, on the screen now, on the left-hand side, there's a basic canvas element with an image that's been drawn to it. And so on the right-hand side, this is the original image that we are loading and then drawing onto our canvas element. So we'll be looking at how we can do this, as well as how we can use the built-in draw image methods to go ahead and scale out our image when we draw them. So as an example here with the image, we've now zoomed in because we've scaled that image. And then finally, what we'll be doing is we'll be seeing how we can use the base image to go ahead and slice out part of that image when we draw it somewhere on our canvas. So I just want to give a quick shout out to Ansimus. He is the one that created the art that we're using in this demo here. So there'll be a link in the description of the video to this asset and where you can get it. All right, so to follow along with the video, there'll be a link to the starter source code in the description of this video. There'll also be a link to the completed source code if you'd like to go ahead and grab that. So to go ahead and start it, if you go ahead and download that source code, we'll go ahead and open that in your IDE of choice. So in the source code, there should be a folder structure similar to this. So you should have an assets folder that will have the image asset that we'll be using. And under the source folder, there will be two JS files, main.js and encoded image.js. And then finally, the index.html page. So this is just a basic web page. It's our main entry point to our web app. And on here, we just have some basic styling to go ahead and apply it to our canvas element. And we go ahead and create our canvas element on our page, and we reference the main.js file. And then in our main.js file, right now we are just getting a reference to our canvas element and the canvas rendering context for our 2D so we can draw to our canvas. So in order to draw images to your canvas element, it's really a two-step process. Your first step is you need to get a reference to the image data. And this can be done a number of ways. One of them is you can have an HTML image element object that has your image already loaded. You can reference another canvas element that has and use that as your source. You could also load your image through a URL, and then you'll have your data that way. So that's the first step. Once you have the actual image data, you can then use that to draw it to your canvas. And this is done by using your canvas context and the methods that are available there to draw onto your canvas element. So as I mentioned, there's a few ways we can do this, but for this example, what we're going to do is we'll construct our own HTML image element in our code, and then we'll go ahead and provide the source to that element to the image that we want to use. So to get started, what we'll do is we'll come into our code, and what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and create a new function, and we're just going to do function, we'll do load image. And inside here, we'll expect one argument called source. And so source is going to be the URL to the image that we want to load and place into our HTML image element. So then inside our function, what we're going to do is we'll just do const image will equal a new image. And this will give us a new HTML image element. And then what we can do from there is we can use our element. We can update our source attribute to be equal to the source that we passed in. And then what we'll go ahead and do is we're just going to return our image element so that way we can reference it. So now that we have a function to go ahead and construct our HTML image element, we need to go ahead and call that from our main code. So what we'll do is at the bottom of our code block here, we're just do const image, and we'll set it equal to load image. And we'll go ahead and provide our asset paths. We'll have assets, and we'll have grunge tileset.png. And so when our page reloads, it looks like nothing's happened. And this is to be expected because all we've done is constructed a new HTML image element, but we didn't actually add it to our web page. But if we go ahead and go into our network tab, what we should see is we should see a network call to grab the image element, the image asset that we specified. And we do see that. So our code is working. If we do want to see something, what we can do is we can do document get element by ID. We're going to go ahead and reference our main div here by the ID, so game container. And what we'll do is we're just going to call append. And what this will allow us to do is it allows us to add our HTML elements to our existing DOM. And so if we append our image, what we should see right away is our canvas element is here, and then we have our image element here. So we know our code's working. However, we don't want to actually render out this image to our web page. Instead, we want to use the data of that image to draw to our canvas. And so to do that, all we need to do is reference our canvas context, and then we need to call drawImage. And so drawImage has a few ways you can provide arguments when you call this method. And for the most basic one, you can provide the image source that you want to draw, as well as the X and Y coordinates of where you want this to be drawn onto your canvas. So if we provide our image element that we created, and then we provide 0, 0 to go ahead and draw, what should happen is our canvas should now be back to black and there should be no image on it. And so the reason for that is when we load in our image data, this can take some time. And typically it's fairly quick, but when we call our load image function here, we start loading this data, and this will happen asynchronously, and we're not waiting for it to complete before we call draw image. So just to see an example, if we use set timeout, and we go ahead and place our draw image code inside here. And let's just add we'll do a relatively short timeout, half a second. You'll see now our page will refresh. And after that half second, we now go ahead and draw out our image data to our canvas element. All right, and so typically we wouldn't want to use set timeout when we go to draw our images. And the reason for this is because you imagine if you have to load in these assets, if you're loading in a large number of them, you'd want to wait for all of them to be completed. Or if your network is very laggy or you don't have great speeds, we could end up calling our callback before our data is actually ready. And so a better way to handle this is we can actually add an event listener to know when our data is fully loaded. And once we've loaded in our image data, then we'll go ahead and proceed and draw our image to our canvas element. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to convert our load image function into a function that's going to return a promise instead of the HTML image element directly. And so to do that, all we need to do is to return new promise, and we're just going to add in the resolve. And so inside the code block here, we'll place in our image creation. And instead of returning our image, what we're going to do is add in our event listener. So we'll do image dot add event listener. So we're adding an event listener to our HTML image element. And inside this event listener, we need to specify what event we want to listen for. And so this will be the load event. And then we can specify a callback that will be invoked once this event triggers. And so we're just going to go ahead and resolve our image element. And we'll go ahead and specify false for our additional attribute there. All right, so now that we've converted this into a promise, what we can actually do in our code now is we can call await on our load image. We can get rid of our set timeout, and now we can go ahead and draw our image. So what we did here is basically we converted our image creation to be an asynchronous process where we return a new promise that will only resolve once our image data is loaded. So if our network takes a while to load in this image, if it's very large or we have some latency, we're going to wait for that to finish. And once that's done, and only when that's done, will we then proceed to draw our image. All All right, so before we get into image scaling, I want to go ahead and come back to our drawImage method and the logic that's used here. So as I mentioned, the drawImage method can take in a variable number of arguments, and depending on what you pass, it'll do different things. So when you provide your 3 arguments, so your image source and your x and y position, what you're really doing is you're providing your HTML image element that has your image data. And from this original image, the Canvas API will then draw that data onto your Canvas element. And then your X and Y position will control where this is going to be drawn onto your Canvas element. So in the example here, we did 0, 0. And so that places our image at the top left corner of our Canvas element. But if I change this to something like 50, 50, our image on our canvas is now moved. And so how this works is, if you pretend this rectangle here is our canvas element, your coordinates for when you want to draw to your canvas, and when you call the draw image, is your x and y value, this top left corner, is 0, 0. And so when you provide an x value, that's how far over we're going to draw to the right on our canvas element. And when you provide your y value, that's how far down we're going to come from the top of our canvas element to draw our image, to draw onto our canvas. And so when you call draw image, that position you provide will always be the top left corner of your source image. And so your image will actually start here and then be drawn onto your canvas, and start from the top left corner and go down. And so this is how we can control where we place the image onto our canvas element. All right, so to scale our image, it's relatively easy. Basically, when we call our drawImage method, we can provide 2 additional arguments, and this is the width and the height. And these 2 arguments allow us to control the width and the height of the image that is drawn onto the canvas element. So typically, if you do not provide these 2 values, then when you call drawImage, it's going to use the original image width and height when it draws that image onto the canvas. So to see an example, if I just go ahead and pass in like 50 and 50, this is going to have a consequence of drawing out our image that is only 50 pixels by 50 pixels. And so this can go ahead and distort your image if you don't scale it properly. So let's say if I have a use case where I want to actually scale my image times 2, what we can do is we can take our image and we'll call on our width, and we'll just multiply that by 2. And then we will also use our image element and we'll grab the height and we'll just multiply that by 2. So now what happens is now we're taking the original image's width and height and we're scaling both the height and width by 2. And we could also use this for scaling down. So if I wanted to have our image be half of the size, we could do the same thing here. All right, so our third and final way of using the drawImage method is we can actually use this to slice our image. And what this means is we can specify an area of our image that we want to draw out to our canvas elements. We don't actually have to draw the whole image. We can pick a part of it and draw that out to our canvas element. And so this is slicing. And so to use slicing, when we use our drawImage method, we need to actually specify 9 parameters. So the first one's going to be your image, and then the next 4 are going to be from the source image, where you want to start your slice, and then how big you want that slice to be. And then finally, the last 4 are going to be your canvas, so your destination, so where you want this image to be placed and how big you want it to actually be. So similar to when we go to scale it. All right, so to see an example of this, what we're going to do is we're just going to populate some values here. So what I'm going to do is we'll have our image. We're going to go ahead and say we'll start at the X position of 200. We'll do the Y position of 0. We're going to go ahead and 200 width, and we'll do 160 for our height. And then for our canvas, we're going to start at position 100 for our X, 0 for our Y, and then we'll have a width of 200 and a height of 160. And so if we go ahead and save, and when our canvas refreshes, you'll see now we are just drawing a part of the original image. And so just to get a better understanding of how this works, when we call the drawImage method, Our first parameter will be our image source, as always. The next two values are going to be what we call the SX and the SY. So the source image X and Y position of where you want to start your cut. So if you imagine, if you take a look here, we have this original image. When we provide that SX and SY, that controls where the top left corner of the image where we're going to start our cut. So then on our S width and our S height, this is going to control how big of the rectangle we're going to use for our slice. And so when we specify our width and height, this is going to result in just this part of the image being drawn onto our canvas. So once we've picked what we want to slice out of the original image, we need to provide our information for where we want the destination to be, so our canvas element. So this will be our DX and our DY. And so this is going to control where we place our image on the resulting canvas element, where it's going to start that top left corner. So similar to our original drawImage method where we just provide that X and Y. And then finally, the last two parameters are going to be your D width and your D height. And this controls how big the resulting image will be. And so this is how we can scale that original slice. So when you provide the same values that were cut from the source image, you'll just draw that out at scale of 1. But if, for example, I want to multiply this by 2, then what will happen is it's going to go ahead and scale our image times 2. And so that's it for scaling. And so by being able to slice your image, this will allow you to do more complex things like use a sprite sheet. When you load that image into your game, you can go ahead and slice it appropriately, and then you can create your animations from that sprite sheet. And this could also be used to do things like use 9-slice image scaling, where you want to stretch and scale your image without it distorting. All right, so that is the 3 different ways we can use the drawImage method to go ahead and draw images to our canvas, scale images, and then to also do things like slicing. The last thing I want to talk about is I want to go revisit how we load in images into our game. So another way you can load in your images is if you have the base64 encoded data of your image, you don't actually need to provide the URL to your image. You can just go ahead and use that encoded data in your game. And so this is nice for when you have only a couple images and they're pretty small in size. But when your game or your project has a lot of images, it's not recommended to use this approach because it will increase the bundle size of your application since you're encoding your image. And so if you're not familiar, basically when we do our GET request to get our image and we load in that data, when that data is read, it is encoded in base64. And so what we're looking on the screen here is this is a string representation of the data that makes up the original source image. And so with this string, when we use it in our code, we can just reference this directly. And then the Canvas APIs know how to interpret this data to render those images onto the canvas. And so to see an example of how to do this, what we're going to do is we're going to make a new function. And we're just going to do function, and we will do get encoded image. And in this function, we're going to go ahead and return a promise. So similar to like our load image function. And instead of using the source, what we're going to do is we're going to reference that encoded image that we have in our encoded image.js file. And then what we'll do is we're just going to call get encoded image, remove our source. And if we save, what should happen is our canvas will refresh and it doesn't look like anything changed. And that's good because this data here is the same as the original source image. All right, so just to recap, we covered a number of different topics here. We saw how we can dynamically create image elements and use those to load images into our game. We saw how we could use encoded image data and apply that to our image source. So then that way we don't have to have a URL for our images. We don't have to host it directly. We also took a look at how we then could draw our images to our canvas element, and we saw the different ways we could use the drawImage method to do things like scale our images and to do things like slicing. All right, with that, that brings this video to an end. So just as a reminder, there'll be a link in the description of the video to the completed source code. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the content. If you did, please consider liking or subscribing. If there are other topics that you'd like to see covered on this channel on Phaser 3, please leave a comment down below. And if you're interested in more great Phaser 3 content, please go ahead and check out some of the links on your screen now.